We are group number 4. We are going to be looking at question number 5, which says distinguish between quantitative data and qualitative data. So in this presentation, we are going to define quantitative data. We are going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of quantitative data. We are also going to look at qualitative data. Then look at the advantages of qualitative data and disadvantages of qualitative data. At the end, we are going to compare quantitative data with qualitative data. So before we get into our presentation, we want to start by defining data. When you're talking about data, we are talking about facts and statistics that have been collected together for references or for analytical purposes. Let's say one has to do a research in something, then they need data, they need facts that they can deal with so as to conduct a certain research. So data, those are the facts or statistics that has been collected for analytical purposes. Someone might also define data as values of qualitative or quantitative variables. Someone might say data is the values of qualitative or quantitative variables which are used in analyzing data. So now we talk about quantitative data. When you're talking about quantitative data, we are dealing with quantity. We are talking about any data that has something to do with quantity. Quantity, by quantity we mean numbers. Our data should be presented in the form of statistical numbers, numerical numbers. So quantitative data looks at anything that has to do with quantity. We might be looking at the number of people in a family, the number of students in a class, the number of people studying data science and informatics, the number of students at the University of Zimbabwe. Quantitative data might also come in forms of percentages, where we might say 30% of the students at the University of Zimbabwe stay in Harare. We might also describe our data at a scale maybe from 1 to 4, the quality of food that is produced. We might just rate food on a scale of 1 to 4. That is also quantitative data. Anything that has to do with number. We might talk of shoe size. We might talk of the number of people in a family. We might talk of anything that has to do with quantity. It lies under quantitative data. So these numerical or statistical values can be represented in forms of numbers, percentages, or rates. Quantitative data, it allows us to compare and contrast different vast information sources, which when we talk of vast information sources, we just mean large sources of information which are very large, which we can compare using quantitative data. We might be having information from the year of 2008, like people who faced hunger in the year of 2008. We might be comparing it with the number of people who are facing hunger in the year of 2021, and that is quantitative data. So it allows us to compare vast information sources and come up with conclusions from that. We also look at the advantages of quantitative data. Quantitative data, it is very reliable. Quantitative data, it is normally accurate. Quantitative data is easy to communicate and elaborate. Since we are talking about statistical, like it can be represented statistically, where we can make use of histograms of our data. You have collected your data and now you want to represent that information. You make use of histograms, you make use of bar graphs, you make use of histograms or pie charts. So we say it is easy to understand. One can easily understand the bar graphs, one can easily understand the bar charts. We also look at the disadvantages of quantitative data. Quantitative data, it has limited options, like when the respondents can only answer the question based on two sides. Let's say it's a questionnaire that you are answering, and it has only two options, where you can say, do you agree agree or disagree. You only have a limited choice which lies on agreeing or disagreeing. You don't have to opt for other options instead of agreeing or disagreeing. So we say there are limited options where respondents cannot choose other options other than the choices that are only given. High complexity, require expertise. Quantitative data tells us very little about the why. As we have said, quantitative data, it only looks at the how many and what. It does not tell us about why this had to happen. It only tells us like we have this number of people that have been suffering from hunger, but it does not tell us why these people have been suffering from hunger. So we say quantitative data, it lacks depth of the information, it lacks depth in brief, since it does not give us the why. I hope we are still together. And now we look at qualitative data. As the name suggests, we are talking about quality. Qualitative data, it looks at anything that has to do with quality. We might be talking of color, skin color. This one is light, this one is dark. Since we are comparing the quality of two things, it becomes qualitative data. Anything that has to do with quality, it becomes qualitative data. We might also talk about satisfaction. It's qualitative data. You went and ate at a restaurant, then you were satisfied, you were not satisfied. So satisfaction, it lies on qualitative data since it looks at the quality of your satisfaction. On qualitative data, we can also talk of flavor, whereby we are comparing the flavors of drinks. We can also talk of hair types. We can also talk of hair color. Anything that has to do with quality, it lies within qualitative data. Qualitative data now, it looks at the why. Why did this had to happen? Why did a lot of people suffer from hunger in the year of 2008? Why did that has to happen? That is now qualitative data. We are looking at the why, the reasons why something had to happen. Now we look at the advantages of qualitative data. Advantages of qualitative data, it is better to understand since it is better to understand. It provides explanations. You can understand in this year a lot of people suffered hunger. Why did it happen? Since it tells us about the why, we say it is easy to understand. It is better to understand rather than quantitative data which just gives you numbers like the number of people who suffered is this. It does not tell you why did they have to suffer. So we say it is better to understand it and it provides information. Another advantage is that better identification of behavior patterns. Another one is qualitative data encourages respondents to talk freely, unlike in quantitative data where you have limited options, like you can just agree or disagree. Here in qualitative data, you talk freely. You can leave a comment on your questionnaire. You are allowed to leave comments. You can explain your interaction. You can tell the you can tell the person who is interviewing you exactly what happened, or you can express your feelings on the questionnaire. So qualitative data, in other words, it talks about people's behavior. You have been interacting with something, then we are now looking at your feedbacks after you have interacted with a certain resource or anything that has to do with quality. Qualitative methods produce data that allow the researcher to gain a more realistic view of the world that cannot be experienced in the numerical data. Like it gives you a certain understanding which you might not get maybe when you are just looking at numbers. I hope we are still together. Now we look at the disadvantages of qualitative data. Lesser reachability, time consuming. Imagine you have to read all the comments in questionnaires. You have to interact with people, so it becomes more time consuming. It requires a lot of time. Not easy to generalize. Possibility of bias. People might give wrong feedbacks. People might lie. So the bias is common also even in quantitative data, but the level of bias in qualitative data is higher than that which is in quantitative data. It's difficult to compare qualitative research. Imagine when you have to compare the hair type, rather than in quantitative data, you can just compare the number of people who suffered from poverty in this year compared to this year. But it's easy to compare numbers rather than comparing hair types. How do you compare hair types rather than comparing skin color? And also, how in quantitative data it is easy, we can find the average. Since we are dealing with numbers, it is easy to calculate the averages. Now how are we able to calculate the averages in qualitative information? In qualitative data, it becomes very hard to look for averages, and it becomes very difficult to compare qualitative researches. Qualitative data also tends to be structured in ways that make the research difficult to replicate. In short, we are just saying qualitative data, it is hard, it is difficult to replicate. Another disadvantage is qualitative data, it is hard to collect. Just to summarize, so our disadvantages are like time consuming, lesser reachability, hard to replicate, hard to collect. Qualitative data, it is hard to collect. Now we compare quantitative data versus qualitative data. Quantitative data, it is associated with numbers, whereas qualitative data is associated with details. By numbers, we mean like height. We might be comparing height. In qualitative data, the details, we might like skin color. We might be talking like she's light, she's dark. Quantitative data can be implemented when data is numerical. Like we said, it only deals with numerical data, whereas qualitative data implemented when data can be inserted into groups. I left the word groups, can be inserted into groups. So qualitative data, it only deals with grouped data. Collected data can be statistically analyzed, whereas in qualitative data, collected data can be observed and not evaluated. Sorry, I don't know what was happening there. And not evaluated. Quantitative data examples are height, weight, time, price, number of hungry people. We can talk of a lot of things as long as it has something to do with numbers. Then in qualitative data, examples are beauty, where people can compare, this one is beautiful, this one is more beautiful than this one, you see. And we can also talk about colors, we can also talk about appearance, we can also talk about satisfaction, we can also talk about flavors in a lot of things. We can compare a lot of things. I think we end here. These are the group 4 members. Thank you.